to Accessibility 101. I'm actually going to stand in the middle here. I can look outside. I'm Deborah Reid. I'm currently lead test engineer at Bloom & Wild. Just a brief little bit about us, which means I can talk today. We are Europe's leading online flower delivery company across 8 markets. Last year we bought 2 European peers, Bloom On and Bergamot, and we now have a multi-brand singular European platform. And tech and data is at the heart of our business, and we use it to improve customer experience and minimise cost and improve sustainability. But a bit more about who am I and why am I speaking here today? So I've been at Bloom & Wild for 4 years now. In a previous role, I took an interest in accessibility testing. I wear glasses, as you can see. I'm also dyslexic, and those things sort of triggered my interest in the topic. And then I developed like a passion for sharing the knowledge in the topic. A few years ago, I was diagnosed with a hearing condition, and I now also wear a hearing aid, which has only given me more of a connection to the topic. I also like to bake. Let's just drop that in. It's not all about work. And I've also written an online course about an introduction to accessibility testing, and there'll be a link at the end, so if you're interested in learning a bit more, then you can do that. And I guess that my hope for this talk is by the end you'll be another advocate for accessibility testing. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'm going to start with an introduction, where all good stories begin, why we should improve accessibility, how we measure it. There'll be a couple of activities, so be prepared to get a little bit involved. Some tips and tools, and then obviously a conclusion. So, obviously this is Accessibility 101, but it's more specifically digital accessibility. And I guess that's the first thing to think about, is what is digital accessibility? And the best definition is it's the ability to access and use content online. So it's not just about the access, it's about being able to use it as well. So if we think physically, like with a building, it's not just about can I get into the building, it's can I attend the event, can I interact with the event, can I do what everyone else is doing at the event. So I'm going to ask you to have a think about this. I'm going to give you a bit more information, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what number you think it might be. So have a think, and I'll come back. How many people in the world do you think have at least one disability? Okay, I'll give you some more information, and then we're going to come back to it. So, types of disabilities. Microsoft have got a really great chart, table, diagram, whatever you want to call it, from their inclusive design toolkit, which breaks down disabilities, which makes them a bit easier to think about. So it breaks them down into senses. So we've got touch, sight, hearing, and spoken word. We've also got permanent, temporary, and situational. And I'll come on to examples of those, and they'll make a bit more sense in a minute. And I also feel like it's important to add that you've also got major and minor as well, which can affect the range of which can affect your ability to access digital content online. So for touch, we've got an example of permanent might be someone that's only got one arm. That will affect their ability to interact with digital content. A temporary example of this could be an arm injury. So for a period of time, you have got the same ability as someone that's only got one arm. And a situational example is a new parent or someone that is holding a child, or I don't know, doing something with one arm and you can only got the other one to access digital content with. So it's really interesting to think about the range of people, and it's not just people that have got, you know, a life-changing disability. You've got numerous different people, and it can affect any of us at any time. Any time we could fit into any one of these categories. For sight, I think when we think of disabilities, one of the first ones that comes to mind is someone that is completely blind. But for temporary, we've got someone that's got cataracts, and situational is a distracted driver. Now, if you're thinking like what I was thinking when I saw this, it was, well, why is a distracted driver? Why is a driver trying to use digital content? But if I think back to when I started learning to drive, I would print out the Google directions and I'd look at the first few, and then I would make those turnings. I'd then pull over and look at the next 2 or 3, make those turnings, and basically continue until I got to my destination. With the advances of technology now, you've now got a sat-nav that will speak to you, and it's using a different one of your senses so that you can continue to use your vision for the road, and you can use your hearing to understand which direction you need to turn. So you're less distracted as a driver. Obviously, like, we're not denying that sat-navs are distracting, but it enables you to continue with driving whilst you are navigating. For hearing, we've got someone that is completely deaf. Temporary, we've got someone that has an ear infection. And for hearing, for the situational one, we've got a bartender. So a bartender almost has the opposite challenge of someone being a distracted driver. If you're, let's say, looking up a cocktail recipe as a bartender, you don't want to hear it, spoken to you how to make it, because you can't hear that in a loud bar. What you want as someone in this position is written instructions of how to make the cocktail. So you can see how the written instructions and the spoken word are not just useful to the permanent and temporary disabilities, but even any one of us that could be in a situational environment. And for spoken word, we've got someone who is non-verbal. Laryngitis or tonsillitis, which I can attest to, is very painful and uncomfortable and affects your ability to speak. And someone with a heavy accent could be a situational experience. And I guess on top of all of this, which is already a lot, we've also got the visible and the invisible disabilities. So when you look at someone, you might think, oh, okay, she's just got a slight vision impairment, she wears glasses. You don't see the dyslexia. Unless I pull my hair back, you can't see my hearing aid. So we need to think beyond the surface and the full person and what they may be experiencing. And like I said, when we improve the experience for the permanent disabilities, you're actually improving the experience for anyone that could have a temporary or a situational experience. So I'm going to come back to this question now. How many people in the world do you think have at least one disability? Feel free to shout out.
All of them.
If we consider situational, everyone.
So the figure that I've got is only the permanent disabilities, which is 1 billion, which is actually more than 1 billion now. But like you say, if you were to think about people that have got, and that's just the permanents, if you think about the temporary and the situational, it could be up to that full 8 billion that there are of us in the world now, because you could fit into those categories at any time.
Would something like dyslexia be considered a permanent disability?
Yeah, I was going to say you've not got cognitive.
Yeah, so cognitive isn't on that diagram, but I think sometimes cognitive, not everyone wants to see it as a disability, and so the neurodiversity aspect as well is, I think, almost separate, because it's the definitions are a bit better, but like you say, there's an even more to consider. And this number's on the rise as well. So this is a stat from the World Health Organization last year. So there's a lot of people to consider or alienate with your digital content. So why should we improve it? Obviously, we've got that 1 billion people, right? That is a large market of people to exclude from your content. But different members of organisations will be influenced by different reasons. So that number of people, might not be the most important thing to them. Some accessibility improvements will improve search engine optimization, which might get your SEO and marketing teams interested. An example is alt text. So alt text stands for alternative text, and it's the textual representation of an image. An appropriate alt text is really hard. You may have tried it yourselves, whether it's on Twitter, because they were trying to encourage it, but it's really difficult to get it right, because ideally it needs to be less than 100 characters. It needs to be concise and convey what you're trying to get across in that image. So let's say you've got an article about, dogs are a man's best friend, for example, and you've got a picture of a dog. Are you trying to get across the fact that it's just a dog and dogs are a man's best friend? Or are you trying to get across the breed of the dog, the colour of the dog, the background, where the dog is? So it's thinking about what are you trying to convey in that image, and then textually use that to represent it. And you may have even seen alt text without realising it. If you've got a slow internet connection and the picture hasn't quite loaded yet and you see text, that's the textual representation of the image. That's the old text that someone has either inputted, or if there's none, you'll then see that there is nothing on the image. Positive press, so this is how you get the branding and the social responsibility people interested, the diversity and inclusion people, because if you do accessibility right, you're going to get good press about it, because there's not many people that do it right. And let's not be naive here, because more customers is going to mean more money. But how much money? I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. The spending power of disabled people worldwide is estimated at $13 trillion, and that's increasing about 14% every year. So that's a lot of money that companies are just, no thanks, or haven't thought about it. It's a lot of money, right? And the source here is a company called the Purple Pound, and they basically their whole premise is referring to the spending power of disabled households. So there's loads more information by the Purple Pound if you want to find out some more. Okay, so how do we measure accessibility? So there are some guidelines. They're called WCAG or WCAG, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are 3 levels. A is the lowest level. AA is the mid-level, and if you're already ahead of me, you've worked out that the top level is AAA. So AAA is the highest, the gold standard, the best that you can be, basically. As you go up the levels, it is harder to achieve them because there's a lot more work involved, but the more disabilities and the more people that you're enabling to use your content. Okay, I warned you this was coming, so it's time to get a little bit involved. So we're going to do a little activity on colour contrast. So colour contrast is the difference between the foreground, in this example, the text, and the background colour, and is that difference strong enough for someone with a visual disability to be able to read it easily? So all 4 have the same sentence or line of text, A, B, C, and D. So take a minute either to yourselves or think to the person or chat with the person next to you and have a think about whether you think each of these would pass or fail at the AA level, so the mid-level, not the lowest and not the highest, the mid-level. All right, so I'll give you a minute, have a little think or a chat, and we'll come back to this in a sec.
That's a first.
We're on the
I mean, it's still see, even if it's not like
So, everybody ready to find out? It doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong, it's about learning and understanding today. So, A, the yellow on green, do we think this would pass or fail?
No.
Yes, thought I'd start off with a relatively easy one. The difference between the two is just not strong enough. What about B, pink on pink?
Fail.
Which is a bit of a clue. That would fail. The pinks are not different enough in colour, and I'm going to show you a tool a little bit later as to how to actually test for this specifically. What about the grey on black? That would pass, very good. If that grey was any darker, it would, but at that level it is enough. And what about the the black on, I want to say maroon.
That would fail.
Very good. So yeah, I'm going to show you a tool about how to do that. But so it's about the ratio between the two. And for normal size text, the ratio needs to be 4.5 to 1. And for large text, the ratio needs to be 3 to 1. Okay, one more activity. This time we're looking at font size. So I know it is very big up here on the screen, but each one does have a value like you would. And so again, have a think. And whether each of these would meet the recommended minimum font size for, again, the AA level of accessibility. So I'll set another little timer, have a think.
Are we scaling that to like laptop, like the equivalent?
Yes, but I think it is also relatively representative there.
The rest of the so that's why I'm saying like
Okay. I actually, interesting, heard someone say, even with my eyes, that's difficult. And that's something that's really important, is that if you're finding it difficult to read something, whether it's the size or the contrast, then imagine that someone that's got either even more of or a visual disability, how much they're going to struggle. So, do you think that A would meet the recommended minimum font size?
Yes.
Yes. So A is actually size 28. So yes, that very much would pass.
Would that be single A or double A sort of?
It would be the AA, but I guess like they're not so strict. It's a recommendation with the font size.
Okay.
But yeah, what about B?
Fail.
B would, B is not recommended. B is only size 7. I know it looks quite big up here, but that is actually only size 7. What about C? Getting a bit trickier here.
I think that fails.
That would, it's only size 11. And then what about D?
I think that
Yes.
fails.
It's sort of on the cusp. It is.
Is that 14?
It is 14. Well, and again, like, well done if you got them right, but if you got it wrong and you've learned something today, pat yourselves on the back, 'cause that's what's more important. Okay, so tips and tools. So we're going to start with looking at colour contrast. There should be a video. Maybe click again. Oh, yeah.
No explanation. Oh, no, not ready. Ready to play. Ready to play. Yes. Right.
Okay, so in this video that I'm going to play in just a second, this tool is called Colour Contrast Analyzer. It is free on Windows and Mac. And what it enables you to do, which it'll show in a minute, but I just want to explain it first. If you know the value of your colour, then you can just enter it in right there. If you don't, not a problem. You can use this colour picker, and you can then hover and click on the colour that you want to be using for both the foreground and the background colour, and then it will give you your output here, so the ratio. So for black text on a white background, which we know is like very accessible because it's like the standard, that's got a ratio of 21 to 1, and you need it to be 4.5 to 1, so that's very accessible. So if I click on here, So I'm using the colour picker to select the white on this image for this text, the colour picker for the green in the background. It's got a ratio of 8:1 and it passes at both AA and AAA for both for normal and large text. Oh, you've got to go back to the slides.
Yeah. You're all down, I think.
So, the minimum font size recommended is 12 to 14 pixels. Obviously, the bigger the better. Don't let that stop you. Some people will use minimum below that, but they'll intentionally. It's what's called a bit of a dark pattern. So we don't really want people reading all about cookies and terms and conditions because they're going to, not use our service or they're going to opt out of something. So they deliberately make it small. But if you want people to be able to read your content, ideally this is the minimum that we should be using. But it's not just about the font size, so font styles. So there are serif and sans serif fonts, and this is where my little bit of French comes in useful. Sans in French means without. And the serifs are these, what are highlighted in red here. I call them the kicks and flicks on the ends of letters. And as a dyslexic, and it's not every dyslexic, because obviously everyone has different experiences, but in general, our brains will follow every part of a letter when we're reading. And I'm already a slow reader, so if I'm going to start reading a sentence and looking at every part of every letter, it's going to slow me down even more. I remember at university, when we were given PDFs to read, the first thing I would do, they were always in Times New Roman, I would always copy them, paste them into Word, and change it to a sans serif font, and it meant that I was going to be able to read it that little bit quicker. So, I mean, a lot of fonts are sans serif. The ones I'm using for these slides today, I've deliberately used a sans serif font. If you know from either your design team or you look in the console and you know the font size that you're using, then you can find out from there if it's serif or sans serif. But there are browser add-ons. So there's one called Font Ninja, which will basically list out all the different fonts that you're using on your page, because a lot of people won't just use one for all of their branding. And then from there, you can work out if it's serif or sans serif. So ideally, to be more inclusive and accessible, we use sans serif fonts. Now, scrolling. So a lot of us will have our preferences when we're either at home or, you have to adapt when you're in different circumstances. But not everyone can chop and change the way that they scroll. So we need to be thinking about enabling all of these different types of scrolling for our digital content. So, tabbing. Some people can only tab, they can't use a mouse. So we need to think about, can we tab through this form? Does it go through in the natural order of the fields? Can we actually submit the form using our tab key? I'm actually a tabber by preference. I find it a much smoother way to transition to a website, but that accessibility improvement of being able to tab will also improve the experience of someone like me that just naturally likes to do that. A mouse scroll bar. So a lot of people, when they're in the office or if you've got a home office setup, you've got an external mouse that's likely to have a scroll bar. Can you scroll using that on your digital content? Now, I know a touchpad is quite an unpopular one, but it may be that you're on the train, you're on the go, it's all you can use, or sometimes it is all people can use. You need to make sure that you're able to scroll your content using a touchpad. And finally, the arrow keys. Now, I'm not going to name the website, but I was on a website a while ago, and the only way to scroll was using the arrow keys. Now, it's important that you are enabling people to scroll using that method, but it can't be it's not about just having one of these. You need to be trying to work on them all.
Does the touchpad account for touch screen?
Yes, that's also important to think about, because you've also got then the natural and the unnatural scroll interactions as well. But you might be stuck using your arrow keys because your touchpad is broken or you don't have a mouse available. So it's not just about, one of these. You've got to think about multiples. Aware that I've mostly spoken about manual accessibility testing today. There are, of course, ways to automate it. There's websites there's applications called Wave, and they'll basically give you an overall website evaluation of everything that is passing and failing accessibility on the entire website. But I want to warn you that amount of information can be very overwhelming, especially if you're quite new to the topic. So I would always advise that you learn about accessibility first, you try out some of the manual tools and you understand how that works and why it passes and why things fail, and then maybe look into the automation side. But another caveat, automated accessibility testing will only find about 30% of the accessibility barriers. So a bit like, we know with automation, you can't fully replace manual testing because there's some things the automation won't pick up on, like the exploratory side. It's the same with this. So it's really important to not just think, I'll get an automated report, I'll fix everything in there and then I'm all good. It's not as simple as that, sadly. So, in conclusion, there is no one size that fits all. I think I've demonstrated that a little bit today. Every disability is different and will affect people in a unique way. So we need to keep making improvements, talking to people, trying tooling, and keeping an open mind. And we need to make it the norm. Accessible experiences should be the norm and not the exception. And one example I've had of this recently is that if anyone's used Google Meet for video conferencing online, as a user, I can switch on captions whenever I need to in a meeting. And for me and my dyslexia, that means I can process what people are saying that bit easier. In Zoom, not only does the host have to have a third-party integration set up, they need to enable captions at the beginning of every single meeting. So we need to be thinking about helping other people and not waiting until we are affected to be making that difference. And like I said earlier on, improving accessibility actually improves the experience for everybody. Thank you for listening. There's a link and a QR code, or there's actually a QR code here for the Wi-Fi if anyone needs to go onto it. But if you're interested in learning a bit more, I've written an online course on Ministry of Testing with more details. Questions?
So you mentioned that automated tools only pick up a small proportion of the issues. Are there any particular techniques you'd recommend for manual testing, assuming you don't have access to anyone with particular problems you're testing for?
I think it is important to, there's people that do like sort of usability and talking to actual customers, and as well as talking to like your average customer that's like fully able-bodied and has no disabilities, you need to do the same thing. You need to actually talk to the people that have got the disabilities, have them use your system, see what things they're struggling with, and that will highlight some key things. So can they, so the alt text, for example, that tends to be read out using a screen reader. If they can't hear, let's say Bloom and Wild, for example, it's a bad example, but like if the alt text doesn't sufficiently explain what a bouquet looks like, you're going to lose them. So if you're able to talk to a range of people that have got different disabilities and hear from them what they're struggling with, obviously the automation can't speak for itself.
I suppose reading the alt text to see if it's actually meaningful is one thing you can do as well.
Exactly.
So actually, if you fire up PowerPoint, one of the favourite things is it'll auto-generate the alt text with computer vision. So paste any image in, it will give it a standard definition, which is quite good. Would you recommend any kind of crowd testing companies like Testbirds or somebody who specifically does accessibility testing as part of their crowds?
I've not actually come across any that specialise in per se. I think that's why the usability side of finding the customers, but there might be one out there that I haven't heard of yet, or maybe they might start. Yes.
Sorry, I'll let you go first if you want.
No, please go ahead. Yes.
Is Fable one of the organisations which where you employ people with different disabilities to do testing as well? I think it's based in the States, but they're one organisation I've heard of.
I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, thank you. I was also going to say, fantastic presentation, and accessibility testing is an area which I'm looking to get some more experience as well. So you've given me some really good reasons why I should consider that as well. And there's really good people like yourself and AD Stokes who are sort of championing it, and I think it's fantastic. I'm going to have a look at your course on Ministry of Testing, but what other advice would you give me to sort of help get more a better understanding of it? I mean, I'll also talk to you sort of after this talk as well at some point. So I've just got a few things I'd like to sort of speak to you about as well, please. But what recommendations, what would you advise me to do to sort of help get a better understanding of it, please?
I think it's about talking to some of the people in your company and working out who your allies could be
Yeah.
to work with. So whether it's one particular designer that is, willing to look into what colour contrast they're advising that, the developers then code in. It's worth talking to the product managers and, when they're doing the usability testing, are they hearing things from customers about, I'm struggling to do this? So I think the more allies that you've got, if you're doing this internally, the more people you've got to sort of work with and bounce ideas off of and learn with. And I'd say playing with the tooling and understanding what the differences are, and between the pass and the fail of like the colour contrast, for example. I mean, there's loads of other ways to do accessibility testing, and there's loads of other different elements I've not even had a chance to cover today. So I'd say looking into like what other things you can do to improve it, because some may be quite restricted in some companies. You may not be able to make as much impact in one area, but there will always be an area that you can. So it's finding, whether it's if you're using a third-party tool for your imagery and they don't have an alt text section for you to be able to use, then you need to work with them to do that. But it might be that the colour contrast with your designers is more within your control.
Thank you.
Is that right?
Presumably the standards, the A, AA, AAA are published somewhere.
Yeah. It's like a really
Can you
giant
just Google
checklist.
for it?
Yes, they very much will be online. It is like a giant checklist, and I would obviously start with A, and then you can start sort of promoting that you're level A, and some people have got like a whole page on their website about this is how we're meeting it and stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, I've got two questions if you don't mind, if we've got time. So the first question is, do you translate the WCAG guidelines, A, AA or AAA, into test scripts that can be reused multiple times for various websites? And if you're buying companies and you're just going to repeat the testing on their newly branded website, do you translate those into test scripts so that they're, can be formed as part of your test management processes?
I think you can do. I think you always need to take it a step earlier, because just reporting on what you're, with stuff's passing and failing, it's, you need to, someone was talking about shift left earlier, if you're not working with the designers and the developers to actually make it accessible, and having all these scripts saying you're failing the benefits.
Assuming you've got requirements, so you would work with the BAs to get the requirements in early and say, have we got accessibility requirements? That leads me on to my next question. So you talked about the $1 trillion market that is, untapped because of the disabilities. If you just look at the other side of it, from my point of view, the ethical side of this. So you're not running a business that makes money from the systems being used. You're having systems internally inside a business to allow the company to just operate, not make their money. That might be a separate thing. So ethically, you want to make sure they're accessible. How would you suggest going about making sure that you can persuade the business that the system should be accessible as well? So you have a project, we're developing a new system for 100 scientists to use. They work in that room over there. And as a tester, you say, right, let's make sure this system's accessible. You may be faced with a stone wall of, no, we just need to create a system for these 100 people to use. You have to go and talk to them to find out who's got disabilities. And just from a practical point of view.
They're all going to be on the spectrum, aren't they, if they're engineers anyway? So.
Every single one of them.
I had this exact same thing.
Yeah. So
I was testing a system for our drivers. It was a last mile delivery
yes.
system.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we don't have to worry because they're drivers, so therefore they can see, they can do. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
They're low tech users. Let's make it. But
Yeah.
I was back down.
And I think that's part of that question. The same thing is, if all the drivers said, yeah, none of us have got any disabilities, is it still ethical to test your system for accessibility?
So the ethics is a really interesting point, because it is the right thing to do at the end of the day, but that I have found that is not enough of a we need to do this. Like, you don't get enough people saying, oh, okay, of course we should do that, because they don't see it through those people's eyes. And so sometimes okay, you may not have the data of the specific group of people that you're working with, but we've got the data in terms of the number of people that have got a disability. And if you can use that to like make your case, and ideally you do talk to the people, it doesn't have to be who's got disability, hands up, but seeing how someone uses the system and what challenges they may have, because not everyone that's got a disability will have it recognised and diagnosed. Like before I had my hearing aid, I thought I might have a bit of a hearing problem and didn't know about it. So I wish it was as simple as, right, hands up if you've got a problem that we need to help you with. But it's about trying to build it in from the beginning in terms of, okay, this isn't just an edge case, this isn't just one person out of 100. This could be anybody. This could be someone, if one person leaves, another person joins, what about that person? They may have a challenge. Like I was helping out on the customer help desk a while ago and taking calls from customers, and the headsets that they use didn't work with my hearing aid. So when they'd ordered them, they offered, okay, well, maybe this is a cheap one, or this one works well. They've not thought about, right, how would this work with other people that aren't normal?
So it's got to come from the top down, from management, to say we want ethically or monetary, we want to make sure our systems are accessible, because there's a tester going upwards all the way up. You can talk to your BA and say, let's get the AAA guidelines translated into requirements and I'll write scripts, and then we'll pass or fail, or they meet recommended or don't. It's got to come from the top down, would you say? It's harder going up.
It is harder going up,
Yeah.
but getting those people aware of what is going on, it can be challenging. So if you go to your BA with that, and then they can take that higher, or you can go with them and take that higher. I mean, if you're able to do, I don't know, if people do lunch and learns or brown bag sessions, and you can do it with more people and say, right, we need to care about this and this is why, you find ways to talk to the higher ups, because like you say, they're in control.
I thought there was some legal requirements around this as well. So I've worked in highly unionised public sector workplaces where you had to do this. So it wasn't management, it was the unions. But I thought there was some interplay with the Disability Discrimination Act.
So government websites do have to be accessible to an extent. In America, there are more rules around who has to be accessible. I don't know if anyone heard about that time that Domino's was sued because a blind gentleman said that he couldn't order pizza on their app. And rather than fixing just the accessibility challenges, they spent more than they would have spent to fix the problem on legal fees to argue that this guy was wrong. And this guy won in the end, obviously. So over here, I think in the future there will be probably like a level A requirement for companies, which I guess is why it's important to be thinking about it before it gets to that point. But right now in the UK it is just government websites. Sorry, I know that we've run over. Do we need to answer one more question?
I think we can take one more. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was also going to ask as well, are there similar sort of WCAG guidelines for mobile apps as well? Just out of curiosity.
I believe so. Yes, I think that the original. So the focus was definitely started with websites. Obviously, like the number of apps that we also need to have accessible. So yes, thank you for confirming that.
I have experience with mobile accessibility testing.
Thank you.
Great.
So there is something called WCAG. So as Deborah mentioned, WCAG is for web application.
Yeah.
There's something called WCAG ICT.
Okay.
For those which is not web applications, that includes mobile, desktop, or purely just a document as well. Let's say Word. PowerPoint.
They're not the easiest guidelines to read, those WCAG guidelines. Somebody needs to basically translate them for the software testing community.
Google Lighthouse V2 covers a lot of this,
Yeah.
but not all of it. It's a good starting point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reference documents that you can find that kind of dumb it down for us to technical terms that make it really easy. I think with my experience, without meaning to overstep, but with the experience that I've had doing accessibility testing, I think the best thing that you can do is kind of take a step back before starting and defining what you want to cover and how you can overlap. For example, you mentioned tabbing through the system. If you do tab indexes throughout your page, and then you also do alt text, that kind of enables you for when you go to do screen reader testing, what the alt text is what's going to be read out as you're tabbing through. That's generally how hearing impaired or visually impaired people are going to navigate through a page. So you can there's certain things that you can do that'll cover multiple parts of the WCAG principles. So you kind of just have to plan your work accordingly to make sure that you're covering them in a smart fashion.
It sounds like a conversation that might be best to have some sandwiches.
Somebody's hungry.
So thank you very much, Deborah. That was great.